That's when you begin to find that the cold, the common cold, has a very specific smell. The flu has a smell. COVID had a smell. The biggest difference between these new, I call them garage readers, but the biggest difference between a garage reader and someone that has done developmental work is they don't know the difference between their imagination and their intuition. They don't know the difference. The development starts by allowing yourself to be wrong.
These moon alien beings, and
I talk about moonbeam energy. In the Hawaiian Islands, we call that Mahina, which would translate into the goddess of the moon. When you look at the identity of frequency within Moonlight, what I found as a small child is that energy appears to be sentient within the Moonlight. Now, that was
Ultra minds, ultra minds, ultra minds, ultra JK, ultra. Ultra minds, ultra minds, ultra minds, ultra JK, ultra.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ultra Minds. I am here with a matching, we are dressed the same today, with a matching guest who I am so excited to finally connect with. We've been connecting on social media for the last couple years, but this is our first little coffee date that we're having here without the coffee. So I'm so excited to introduce you guys to Kimo Kepano, who is the light seer. And we're going to get into that. What is seeing? What is the light seer? And I know that you have many more senses besides seeing that are gifted, such as smelling, hearing, sensing, all the senses. So Kimo, thank you so much for being here.
Mahalo. I am so excited. This entire week, I've just felt like I can't believe we're finally having a play date. I definitely feel like we've had a lot of spiritual play dates, especially in the way that I watch the way that you present and I watch your content and the way that you unwind everything. I hope that we can unwind some new stuff today for maybe for each other, but also for people who are tuning in to the very first time. I'm so excited.
And what I love is that I feel like we share kind of the same message, but with such a different presentation. And that goes to show like everybody has their messenger. Everybody has who they're a receiver for. So it's so funny that I've seen you post things so many times, which we're on the same page, but the way that you say it, one, is way more beautiful and warm than the way that I say it, but also just like, it's getting to a different person, you know, like it's reaching someone else, the same message. So I'm so excited to talk about some of those topics today that we are aligned on.
We're going to do it. We're going to do it. And I don't know if you find this to be true, but I'm a firm believer that we really should try to find a union and a nexus point between the spiritual community and the scientific community. And unfortunately, I think that we're at a place where the spiritual community needs a bit of a timeout because we're kind of recycling a lot of belief systems that really don't serve us any longer. And the truth is they never really served us. But, you know, our human brains are trying to make sense of the things that we don't understand so that we spiritualize everything. But not everything is spiritual. Not everything is.
And you're so right. So one thing that you're really amazing at doing in such a loving way is calling out the bullshit in the spiritual spaces, because there's a lot of fear mongering. There's a lot of definitive statements. There's a lot of, I see this darkness in this person and judgment and things like that, and othering of like us versus them. And you do such a beautiful and loving job of, and the way that you laugh in these videos too, as you kind of address these topics. So that's one thing that I love about you. And also like exactly what you're saying, the spiritual community does need a little bit of a timeout on a couple of things.
It does need a timeout. And you know, for me, because I walk the line between the spiritual community, the psychic community, the mediumship community, the healing community, the indigenous community. And there's so many parcels of our language that are similar, but then there's so many vast vacillations away from that. And of course, because we're human, we all have different subjective experiences that feel evidential. But what we strive to do is to really identify what is pure evidence and not subjective evidence, or what is not just emotional evidence, because that's actually not evidence. And a lot of individuals, probably because of how we're in the information age, think that you read a book and you have a sense of something, therefore you should be in session. And there's development that needs to happen. There's exercises and there's learning that needs to happen. So therefore, we're not scaring the community. Because when someone goes to have a conversation with you or a conversation with me, there's great trust already, which means that I have a huge amount of sway in my words. And if my words are biased in any way, I'm going to sway them into a direction that may not be more beneficial for them.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Because you're someone who has your gifts were available at a very young age,
Right.
and you've been on this path for a really long time. And sometimes when people's gifts come on, they kind of instantly want to start offering services. And we understand the reason to want to leave your normal job and start doing that. But what are some of the, and I know you also help people by training people in this, but what are some of the things that people need to keep in mind before they start offering services to people?
This is such a great question, friend. So the biggest thing that I think is helpful for people to know is that our mind and our ego are usually leading the charge. Now, we want to have healthy ego, but a healthy ego does not put the ego first. We have to be able to surrender to our experiences and in essence remain neutral. If I were to say all the things that I imaginatively or creatively think, that's not necessarily pure communication. And the biggest difference between these new, I call them garage readers, but the biggest difference between a garage reader and someone that has done developmental work is they don't know the difference between their imagination and their intuition. They don't know the difference. So therefore, the imagination feels like intuition. And it gets even trickier because then you have practitioners who then start to create a practice offering services that is imagination based. So then imagination gets sidetracked with instinct. And instinct is closer. It is still not intuition. Instinct is a safety mechanism. I'm afraid of this, therefore I feel like we have to move away from that. Well, that's a fear mechanism camouflaging itself as an intuitive aspect. And it's not the same thing. So the lack of development shows when anyone speaks a fear language. And that goes across the board between mediums, psychics, intuitives, seers, healers, indigenous practitioners, across the board. Whenever fear becomes paramount in the language, you have already swayed the conversation and it's non-neutral.
So true. And how did you get so kind of balanced and neutral? Like, of course, we all have our stuff that happens. And I know that you've lived a very rich life outside of just your psychic practices and spiritual practices. But like, how did you kind of find that neutrality in receiving your messages?
I love this question. It took time. And at first, what people don't realize, even though I use the avatar name of the light seer, that is actually by choice. Because when I was first communicating with spirit in the documented cases that I did at the age of 3, they were not in light. It was things that were very scary. I was pulling in information that I should not have known, but it was unalivements, giving names and locations. And you think to yourself, well, why is that little kid seeing everything so scary? I had never seen a scary film before. And that's when my curiosity began to really peak, even at that young of an age, because I was able to witness and perceive when something was coming in quite noir, being a very noir clairvoyant as a child, versus when something was coming in with assistance. And for me, it just made sense. Well, the assistance feels better than the thing that's terrifying me. Even though I can bring in information on the terrifying thing, it doesn't actually make any change. So I do want to do a brief pause for those individuals who are like, who the hell is this guy? Let me just kind of explain how I experience the world. For me, the world is a perception of frequency. And I know that it sounds so sci-fi, and it definitely feels that way. But it feels when I make a choice, now I've learned how to choose, but when I choose to tune in, everything begins to shift where if I'm looking at you, this lovely woman in front of me, but it would look as if a transparency of your visage begins to shift. And then I can see the cells of the body and where things are misaligned. And that's where I learned how to work medically. But in order to learn how to do that, the diagnosis that I was told as a kid, I don't believe that it's real, but it's kind of a fun diagnosis, is that I was dropped on my head. And the truth is I was dropped on my head. I was dropped on my head at the age of 2 in the Honolulu airport in Hawaii, shattered my skull, damaged my occipital bone, and it also shattered that area, and then it damaged my visual cortex center. So in theory, that should have made me become mind blind, but it's not what happened. My abilities are so wild that it feels like it's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs inside of my head. But when I learned that I was finding evidence of the things that I saw through frequency, that's when things started to evolve past spirit communication, going into more medical work. By high school, I was doing more medical work. So now I don't second guess it. Now I don't negate it. Now I actually utilize it to be something that I know is going to be of assistance. So for those of you who are like, who the heck is this guy? That's how I experience the world. It's all through frequency. So now, to further the question, when did the development start? The development starts by allowing yourself to be wrong. People think that though I have a very, very high amount of yielding results, I'm in the 99th percentile to 100% being correct and what I can see in the body and help make shifts. But people don't understand that, well, this is decades of not being correct, though, which means that a lot of these newbies and garage mediums perceive that whatever they see immediately is correct without allowing themselves to grow through what was incorrect. And we have to know what is incorrect. So that way you can use a quantified system of yes and no's and maybes and anomalies and similarities to identify what is my level of correct. And that's what people see of me now without knowing that I was many years of being incorrect.
And so what's interesting too is that, you know, even though for me, I'm more of a researcher, you know, there's so many things that like over time, like I kind of have been moving away from like this kind of my perspective is like higher than it was. I'm kind of going more towards expanded, like wider versus like above and below or like more advanced or those things I'm moving away from. But I feel that my understanding of a lot of topics has become more expanded. So there's a lot of things that even, you know, not as a psychic ability, but just even spiritual information in general kind of has, you know, right and wrong and light and dark and things. And then as you expand your perspective more and more, you kind of realize that that was all a half truth. And you're kind of wrong about all of those things that you needed to believe and needed to know at those times to get where you are. And I think that that's so beautiful, not just even with psychic work, but with everyone in spirituality, whether they are practicing in their personal life or practicing for other people, that really ability to like accept that like it's okay to be wrong about things or to learn things that are beyond what you thought already and to let go of your old beliefs.
Absolutely. I think that change is a beautiful thing. We have a tendency to think that change is scary, and I get it because change means that we need to change, right? But when we perceive information, either through research, which is what you're so good at research, by the way, I am just blown away with how many chords you can find in the way that you present your information. And I know my social media isn't even as advanced as yours, but I know you are spending a lot of time working on the way that you work. So I'm just taking a moment to pause.
Thank you.
It is really spectacular. But when we look at the way that we identify information, we learn, we receive, we absorb the information, and then we set it free. So therefore, the information has its ability to stick where it's supposed to stick, and then to flow where it's supposed to flow, to pause where it needs to pause. So that way we become reflective and interoceptive. We become metacognitive of the things that resonate, the things that are appropriate. There's no way for us to do that if we don't understand the neutral mind. We have to understand the neutral mind.
And so earlier you were kind of talking about like these first visions and things and these first messages that were coming through, and you compared kind of some that were more scary and then some that came in more assisted. Are you meaning kind of like, say, more mediumship past people and their direct experiences who are kind of in a little bit more of a lost state versus spirit guides coming in on behalf of that person a little bit more towards like how shamanic work works more with the person's team?
Yes. All the yeses. Let's just kind of unwind that. I guarantee that people are going to be listening to this. We're already going to push a little bit of a button. And what my encouragement for you to do is just to listen with an open perspective, because I'm going to be saying things that may not resonate with you, and then just let it settle for a moment. Because we are all taught that spiritual energy can be stuck. It can harbor, it can become stagnant, it doesn't cross over. Otherwise, why would I be seeing it? If I'm seeing it, that means that it is stuck. And I get why that is the experience. So let's just talk about the differences between the noir experience versus the light experience. When we are perceiving what we would think about as ghosts, we'll break it down very briefly into just a few different categories. When we break down the identity of ghosts, predominantly what we are seeing is looped energy. Looped energy that doesn't really have a sense of consciousness behind it, meaning that I see this woman walking down the hallway every night at midnight. She doesn't really seem to acknowledge me, be a slight awareness, but there's not a lot of acknowledgement. Well, that's because that is looped intelligence. And the wild thing about looped intelligence is that the living and the dead both experience it, meaning that you and I could be having a really large argument, really like we're not getting along, a really large argument. When you measure the argument through your EMF field, we give off a pulse of energy into your biome. The larger the energy, the larger the biome. When you and I create a biome and we walk away, that biome is still perceived in that space, which means that a sensitive could walk into the room and say, yo, there is these two people. I mean, are they ghosts? Because they're arguing back and forth, without realizing that they're picking up on the mirrored reflection of our energy, which means that it is coming in from the living and the dead. So that's usually ghost energy, what people assume is ghost. Can I go further, or do you have a question?
Please.
Okay. So then we go into the more challenging aspect, which is, what is an echo consciousness? Echo consciousness does appear to have intelligence. So why? If it's saying, I'm in pain, if it's saying that, I'm looking for my child, if it's saying, you've got to help my daughter out, I crossed over, my daughter is still here in pain, why are we receiving that information? When you are speaking to echo consciousness, you are predominantly communicating to the large personality characteristics. You are talking to the large personality characteristics of the energy there. And what I have found is our job as spiritual communicators is to say, I see a gentleman here whose daughter is still alive. They have crossed over. There's a lot of pain. They give you that impression so that way you can receive the essence of who you're talking to. But then here's the challenging part for you as the practitioner. Then it is your job to make sure that you are of assistance of speaking neutrally, which means that echo consciousness has the ability to now communicate spiritually, which means an echo of its personality trait while simultaneously having information on the other side. And the goal is for the reader to know that information, not the energy. If I only say first dimensional field of echo consciousness, there's a man with a daughter who's still alive, he's really upset, I'm only reading the first dimension. And that's garage mediumship, the inability to look past that dimension. You must be able to transpose and transmute that to say, here's the information on the other side. And when you do that, it's like you go from walking through a hallway through walking through this huge realm of insight and information. And you start to pull in so much insight that there's no way you could have known, because they are now offering assistance. It doesn't matter how rapacious or scary or mean or abusive they were in this life. They will give you an echo of that. So you know who you're talking to, but then you've got to transmute. And that's challenging, which is why most mediums don't learn how to do it. They stay talking about what is perceived as stuck.
And so it's interesting because this, obviously we have our different ways of we've come across this information. And so in one of Dolores Cannon's books, she talks about ghosts, and she says that they're more of an echo. And she says, like, her description, which comes through the hypnosis, the subconscious of the clients, is saying that sometimes when a soul is already crossed over and they're kind of reviewing aspects of their life to kind of learn from or get insight or just to experience it, that because they exist there within consciousness, when they start remembering an event that happened, it actually echoes out sometimes to that physical location. So sometimes, so it's like so identical to what you're saying, but just again, like what I said in the beginning, is that sometimes you and I are sharing similar things, but from a different source in different words.
I love that you have such a plethora of information and vocabulary because of all of the insight that you read and that you remember. I love that. You're probably a very book smart girl. Probably I was not my experience.
On the weirdest topics. No, don't ask me about history. Like the weirdest topics only.
What I love about what you said and that cross-referencing of how Dolores talks about it and the people that she has, regressed, is that spirit appears to be multidimensional, meaning being able to experience itself in non-linear ways. That's hard for us as humans to understand because we have linear thinking. We aren't able to think about ourselves as parabolic. We can only think in a very small linear way, not in a circular way. And spirit is circular. Spirit is experiencing and experimenting with multiple different thoughts, views, and dimensions at the same time. Which is why when you see an echo, your job is to make sure that you're actually completing the circle with going into the spiritual realm as well. Now, I want to tell you something that's going to blow your mind. What I have found when you as a sitter, maybe as a paranormal investigator or as like a witch hunter, when you perceive spirit that is in a very specific form of feeling stuck or repressed or not being able to move on, I have never not seen a spirit communicate in that way to a person who wasn't themselves stuck, who wasn't themselves unable to process, which means that spirit is reflection. Spirit will connect to the inner synaptic wiring of your trauma responses, which means that spirit works with your shadow work, with your Jungian shadow work. Spirit will communicate through you with clear coherence when you are clearly coherent. Spirit will communicate through you through evil nescience if all you do is demonic work, because your brain is only wired to perceive evil demonic work, which is why you have individuals like priests who see they have to excise the demon. Well, does it work? Well, of course it works, because that's all that they see. So that's all that they see. That's all that they can be of assistance with, as opposed to saying, well, but if you yourself transmute what you perceive as shadow, your inner shadow, the inner trauma, then you will never need to perceive someone that needs an excisement. You can go with clear cogency to identify, no, this is a person who actually needs assistance because of some kind of bipolarity 1 or 2, or schizophrenic, or some kind of mania or schizoaffective. That's what's happening, not the possession of demon. So it's really up to the sitter to identify how clear and coherent I am. So therefore, I do not perceive anything that is noir or scary.
And then it makes sense too, when you see a lot of different, now with the internet, we get to see so many different psychics' perception on everything. And that's another thing that I love that you do in your videos, is sometimes, like for example, even though it's a slightly different topic, but along the same line, sometimes I see you calling out like the spiritual narcissism. And it's kind of going through that same filter of like their unhealed ego and all of this stuff, where they're like, I was this person in a past life and I was this person in a past life. So can you talk a little bit about that and kind of having a neutral filter with those types of things?
So once again, we have to vet our practitioners. We have to see how they read. We have to assess how results are happening, as opposed to just trusting every psychic. I think that skepticism is actually very helpful. I think that you should be skeptical until you can find resonance of a really clear way to communicate. So with that being said, for example, there was another medium, a spiritual medium online, who was arguing with me. They were arguing with me. I was fine. But their argument was, well, why would you call it this when it's not that? And then I asked very simple questions of, well, are you saying that it's evil and nefarious because of your subjective experiences, or because of, keeping a neutral mind and creating change? And they'll say, well, it always happens like that for me. And if you don't believe me, they literally said, you can kiss my ass. And I thought, I would never, ever go to a reader who uses such angry language so quickly. It's so defensive so fast, because what that tells me is you are non-neutral. You can't have coherent conversations with anyone that may challenge your belief system. That's not a reader I would ever go to. And I go to readers myself. Sometimes it's hard to read on the self, so you go to someone else. But that's an example of why it is important to process internal trauma, to process shadow work. So that way, my job as a reader for the collective and for the community is to say, I myself have to hold myself accountable to things that bring in a sense of umbrage. I have got to work on that so that I can only perceive things in light, which is why my avatar is light and sight. I'm not a dark seer, right? That's not what my avatar is. It's a choice to see everything through light and intelligence. Intelligence being the key word.
Mm. So it's interesting because there's a lot of crossover with, the alien stuff, which is, a bit more of my realm. And I know you get into the alien stuff too.
Yeah.
You didn't put it in your list before, but I knew that I've seen your stuff.
Let's pull that cord. I love it.
But it's very similar. Like, I'm someone who sees all of these different types of alien species, races, even if that's what they are. Most likely they're just inside of us, and this is a multi-dimensional experience. But if, let's just say, there's these different species or races of aliens, it is so extreme, the duality in the spiritual space. Like, there is no one who, hates the grays and the reptilians more than the light workers. And it's like, how is that light work when they're just simply different than us?
I agree.
So now, on the topic of aliens, though, you talked about these moon alien beings, and
yep,
tell us about them.
So let's pull that cord for a moment. So I have had some comments, some video content that I've done where I talk about moonbeam energy. In the Hawaiian Islands, we call that Mahina, which would translate into the goddess of the moon. But when you look at pure frequency, and you know already that, okay, I'm looking at pure frequency, I'm able to cross-reference that scientifically, seeing someone's EMF field, the doctors are saying that I'm correct, your ability to just receive information becomes higher because now you're not judging your mind, which, by the way, many people are seers without realizing. I do want to say that. I am not a satellite seer. I'm not the only one in the world who does this. I know that many people do this and they don't even realize it yet. So people might be seers and they don't even realize it. When you take a look at frequency through light, so for example, when I look at cymatics, the study of sound, vibration in physical form, cymatics visually looks like something before you put the sand on the steel plate and play the bass underneath it. Cymatics looks like something when someone speaks, their vocal cords show shape, which means that you can follow that shape to identify, is there a problem in the body, right? The way that you listen and resonate with the cello will be different than the way that you listen and resonate with country music. Why? Because the cymatic chording harmonizes with your organs in different ways. You can already cross-reference that. When you look at the identity of frequency within Moonlight, what I found as a small child is that energy appears to be sentient within the Moonlight. Now, that was hard for my brain as a child to comprehend. It wasn't until I was older that you learn how to tune into the frequency of the moonlight. And when I say sentience, I actually mean sentience. I mean that there is a sense of awareness within that moonlight. When you tune into that sense of awareness, I call them the helpers, because there does appear to be, well, maybe it's just my brain creating shapes so I can understand it, but there does appear to be the energetics of helper energy that moves forward, which means when I learned to put sick individuals within Moonlight and then say, no, I'm not going to touch it because I don't know if I'm healing it or if they're healing themselves. When you put them in Moonlight, the body chemically begins to change. And from a frequency perspective, it looks like energy is doing like energy autopsy on the physical body. Now, the question that gets confusing is, well, what if my body doesn't do it, but my partner's body did it? Well, that's a different conversation about alkalinity of your body, your desire, your belief system versus them. But there is energy that is sentient in Moonbeam. If you were to give it a shape, they're very sinewy. They're very, very long. Now, are they actual physical form within Moonlight? No. It appears to be a projection of conscious energy through the moonlight. Wow. It's kind of like you seeing a reflection of me 50 feet away, and you're looking at the reflection and thinking that it's me, but it's just a reflection through a mirror or something like that. I am me in physical form with the mirror 50 feet away, and you see the mirror. It looks like that, where it's still a reflection of them, but it is not them. But the energetic still moves through the beam.
So what you're saying is similar to, say, sunlight. We know that sunlight is healing. Sunlight has consciousness. Sunlight gives life. The moonlight, the moonbeams has a similar but different type of energy. Wow.
Absolutely. And I
This is the
love
first
that
time I've ever heard this.
oh my gosh. Well, we should do a deep dive later then. So I love that you bring up the sunlight, because we already know just quantifiably that sunlight is an activation of melatonin, and vitamin D activates the pineal gland. It does a whole bunch of different things. But when you actually look at it through frequency, there is sentient energy beneath the solar flares. Which means if you, okay, oh my gosh, I have never said this to anybody. Like, I've never said this online before. When you look at the sun through frequency, it is not orange. The sun is actually a blue-white-like color, which means if you look at that blue-white-like glow of the sun energy, there is consciousness in that blue-white-like glow, which means if you pull the cord and do a deeper dive, you will find conscious energy there.
Wow. Incredible. Wow.
Isn't that wild? Isn't that wild?
Oh my gosh. We're going to have to do another one after this too.
Oh,
I can't wait to get more into this.
I
Okay.
could spend all day on aliens if I wanted. If I could.
So another thing, probably the gift that I find the most fascinating that you have. What was that?
Oh, I think we cut out for a second.
Oh, sorry. So the gift that I am most fascinated with of yours is your gift of being able to smell. So you can smell sickness, illness, you can smell these things in people. And this goes back to like your psychic medical work. So can you talk about that and talk about like some of the things that have come up? Are these smells consistent throughout people?
Yeah, so what I have found is that when you tune into this ability, in terms of the ability, it is called clairalience, but when you use this ability for healing, it is sonokinesis. And to me, that's the exciting part as well. What can I do with this ability? When you look at the ability to identify smells, even besides just talking about my experience, we already know we have studies of people being able to smell Parkinson's and personality disorders when they learn to identify the consistency of a smell that is unusual or that is off. So, for example, if you talk to nurses that work in hospice, they will always tell you, well, I know about 3 days away from their passing because the body will smell different. Or they'll learn what diabetes smells like simply because of their exposure to it. So for those individuals who are not chronically exposed to unique smells of the human body, how do we tune into that? When you look at any anomalous smell that enters into your biome that is not environmental, meaning if I'm out in the woods, I'll smell pollen, I'll smell trees, I'll smell mulch, I'll smell all those things out in the woods. But if I catch a whiff of something that is non-environmental, then we ask the question, what, where, who, how, what is the insight, what is the information? That's when we begin to ask further insight and information, is when the anomalous smell comes in. So with that being said, when you learn to cross-reference the consistency of the anomalous smell, that's when you begin to find that the common cold, has a very specific smell. The flu has a smell. COVID had a smell. Omicron had a smell. Monkeypox had a smell. They all have very specific smells. So it can help you, even if you're a parent or just you've got a partner. If you were to smell your partner with the flu-like symptoms, but they're not showing flu-like symptoms, you'll be able to identify how far away the flu is, their exposure to it. So, for example, if I'm hanging out with a nephew of mine and I can smell the flu, I'll say, time to hydrate, go to bed right now. And they'll wake up with only small fever-like symptoms. But if you can do even more work with that, if you smell your partner has the flu, depending on how large that smell is, you can gauge how long it is in the system. Meaning they're 3 days away from better health. They're 2 days away. They're 5 days away because of how large the volume is. And that's just cross-referencing, again, your more investigative work with your intuitive work.
Mhm. And so what about other things that are maybe not physical ailments? Do you have smells for that? Or like say someone has like bad vibes or an
Yeah.
incompatible energy to yours.
Yeah.
Are you able to smell those things?
Yeah, yeah. So it depends. So for example, anything that has to do with mental health has a smell. Usually and this is a blanket statement, it does get more nuanced. For the most part, mental health has a burning like smell. Burning toast, burning rubber, burning iron, something that has an overly hot like smell is usually some kind of mental health. And you can identify again a person who you meet that hasn't said a word and you catch a whiff of a certain smell, and then you cross-reference that by having an open dialogue and conversation, and they share with you, yeah, I'm struggling with this, or I've had episodes of that. When you learn how to do that without them telling you the information, ahead of time, cross-referencing it with what you can perceive, we know that you can pick up on those things out of alignment already. How could you utilize that if you were in a partnership? Your body already knows what is alkaline and what is non-alkaline. Now, our brains may not know that, but your body does, which means most people, when they meet someone that they're going to have friction with, they'll just say, not my vibe. That's usually what the brain will say. But the body actually picks up on the fact that I have this vibration, they have that vibration, and we do this, or we do
Mm.
this. Now, that also smells like something. If you catch the glimpse of it, it smells like something goes off immediately. You ever go into your fridge and you open up a Tupperware container to see what's in it, and oh, that's off, right? That's what it feels like when you're interacting with someone who is polar opposite in a non-effective way to your body alkalinity.
Mhm. And then obviously you do a lot of digital readings, so
Yeah.
you're able to smell it also through distance, not in the physical.
Right, and that's the part that confuses a lot of muggles. They'll say, "How can he smell that on the opposite side of the world or in another state?" Or, for example, I made a video that went semi-viral where I was talking about how you can smell a woman's flow. And they're like, "Well, you had me until you talked about that." But that tells me that people don't understand the quantum field. They don't understand quantum entanglement. And that's not even a psychic thing, that's a scientifically studied event where two things are perceived at the same time. And it will not matter how far away it is. It could be your partner in the next bedroom. It could be a friend of yours 5,000 miles away in another continent. You can perceive it at the same time. But again, the identity of what you can perceive must be exercised and then realized and then solidified in your sense of awareness. So that way, we don't second guess. That way, we don't hyperbolize and make wild, dramatic guesses. We have to be able to identify with absolute neutrality what our systems can tell us.
Mhm. And so you brought this up earlier as well with the kind of like a priest doing an exorcism, and you talk about it in a lot of your videos as kind of this misinterpretation or overlap of information between like demonic possession and schizophrenia or mental health issues, and you always have such a grounded way of explaining those things.
I appreciate that. I think that not even the Christian dogmatic community, but even the spiritually dogmatic still have belief systems in that are residual, that have crossed over from the more, I don't want to say which specific religions, but from Christianity in general. When it comes to the idea of demonic possession, I actually can totally understand why it's perceived that way. Even from a seer perspective, which means when your body is complicit, and listen to that word, I'm choosing that word. When your body is complicit with low energy emotions, depression, guilt, shame, jealousy, right? When your body is complicit, which means it is experiencing it while allowing itself to be vulnerable to the experience. When the body experiences those kinds of feelings for a paramount amount of time where it becomes pervasive depression, pervasive jealousy, codependency, your biofield starts to change its shape. And the shape begins to darken the field where the auric field is no longer perceived. The chakras look like they are misaligned. All soul vibration or soul essence or aura-like vibrations begin to shift as well. And I have found that many individuals who say, I can see a demon, I can see an attachment, is picking up on the fact that there is misdiagnosed depression that has been prevalent for a certain amount of time, or there's addictive quality to the nature of their mind and to their emotions without realizing it. But when you don't know those nuances, you scare the shit out of them by saying, no, that's a demon. Well, once again, this is why we have to be able to cross-reference the abilities neutrally with no dogma.
So I want to cross-reference again another Dolores Cannon explanation of something like this and see if it aligns with what you believe. Yeah. So in like the topic of demons, etc., entity attachments, things like that, one of her clients had explained that, you know, a very simplified example is like, you know, imagine our auric field is, you know, egg-like, rounded, but then when we're experiencing, say, guilt, shame, jealousy, it almost puts like a little pocket in there, like just like a little dent. And then that dent is actually almost has a magnetic energy to concentration of that. So if you're in guilt, you've kind of had like a little weak spot in your egg, and then a concentration of guilt similar to that echo energy, which because then it will find each other, and then that concentration of energy will fill that almost like a magnet. So it's not actually a conscious being that is attaching. It's you are a magnet to those energies floating around, pulling them towards you. And it just becomes amplified in your auric field because it kind of gets then stuck on it like a dirt on the window.
Yep. You are, I love that you have that, being able to pull back into that, reading that information, because when we have, let's go back to the conversation of shadow work, unprocessed emotions that we haven't truly excavated through our system, they've got to go somewhere. And they literally push out into your field, either into your subconscious mind or your unconscious experience, and then it can get displaced, which means without realizing it, energy is moving towards the idea of guilt. But then when guilt becomes histrionic, then it can start to fester and feel like it's something else that's affecting me. So when you say someone that has, I hear this one a lot of astral parasites and a lot of demonic entities, I get why that is said, but it is only phase 1. It is only seership 101. It is only mediumship elementary level, because our goal is to be able to see with more definitive insight of what it is. So for example, if we're taking a look at jealousy, all right, jealousy is a very specific vibration. It's very, very dark green-like in color. When you actually, which is actually why I think how spot on the saying of I was green with envy is actually a very spot on intuitive thing to say without realizing it. But it has a very muddy green-like color. When you take a look at jealousy over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, so now you're in a relationship with anxious and abandonment issues, right? When you look at that, that jealousy becomes so large energetically that it completely debilitates heart center chakra. Where does it go? All in the gut. What happens to people who are highly jealous? Gut-related issues. Problems in the field. Why? Because of the lack of understanding of how to process it. Let's go a step further. When you are looking at someone that experiences depression, kind of in and out, depression has a tendency to weigh over the shoulders. And the visualization of depression looks a little bit like a cumulus cloud, but quite dark, right? When that happens over and over and over again, probably within about 3 years, I'm just kind of wildly guessing right now, within about the 3-year mark, it actually creates what feels like texture to the dimensional frequency. And it starts to move itself not around the shoulders, but towards the back. What would that look like to a garage seer? An attachment. And if it is perceived for longer than about 3 years, when it starts to go into like the 5-year mark, like, wow, I'm chronically depressed, I have a very easy relationship with depression, it starts to elongate its system that starts to look like shadow. So many of the times, once again, when we are misdiagnosing astral parasites, demonic entity attachments, and shadow people, is still unprocessed human emotion. So like those individuals who might go into a paranormal investigation and say there's a shadow person in this room. Yeah, I'm perceiving the My perception is someone who experienced depression for a very large amount of time in this.
Wow. And kind of my other, idea of demons,
Mhm,
one of the other ones, because this is kind of more of my personal experience with it, is
mhm,
more so similar to like kind of like a soul fractalization where there's
mhm,
like an inner child wound, a wound at another part of life, and that part almost similar to parts work, similar to shamanic soul retrieval. There's
mhm.
so many different versions of it where so sometimes it could be this outward kind of just cluster of energy that you're magnetizing toward yourself, and then sometimes it's just like a part of yourself that has been exiled that sometimes takes the driver's seat because you allow it to in whatever way.
Yep.
So what do you think about stuff like that? Do you think that there is any like real demons, or
I
is it always something like this emotional stuff?
it is always emotional, and this is the part that's going to really push some of the viewers and listeners, because we have our subjective experiences. These times in our life where it feels like, no, but I saw something, I felt something. Well, that is more emotional evidence as opposed to evidence. So when you work with a transmuter, someone who is able to transmute that insight that you are picking up on, and they know nothing about you, they should be able to pick up on spiritual energy, spiritual guides that only you know about. There's no way for them to know that information, because so many of the times, once again, we're picking up on something that feels fractionated. We're picking up on the severe trauma or shadow aspect of that person, which, come back to full circle, the importance of shadow work. You work on your shadow work, the fractionating of what feels like soul energy will never be perceived. You will
Mhm.
get so clear with it that you say, I know that I feel dysregulated right now. I'm really, really mad at my partner. I am so angry. I'm so dysregulated. Well, the moment we can recognize what that emotion is, we're already starting the mending process.
Mhm.
So that way we don't drop even further. So now it gets a little tricky, because you will have many readers who say, well, soul can split. I've even heard some of Dolores's clients come in who have talked about these split souls. From a frequency perspective, it doesn't look like it's split. It looks like the energetics flowed this way, or flowed that way, or flowed this way. And I think that the closest word in proximity is split, but it doesn't actually look
Mhm.
like the soul is less than. It just looks like it becomes more dimensional. Now it's
Mhm.
focusing on that problem and that problem and that problem while experiencing multiple problems at the same time. So I don't use the word fraction easily, although it's the closest word in proximity.
Mhm. And you know exactly, that's the other thing too, is that in order for any person to receive something, it has to be in the language and the story that they're able to digest.
Mhm,
So I mean, same thing with, religious stories, same thing with
mhm,
like spiritual stories, like about, reptilians or
mhm.
devils or this or that. And it's like whatever people need. So sometimes, the story is kind of a very simplified version of what's happening because it would be too confusing to actually be able to understand that it's kind of the soul is kind of going in different directions and following different things to mend certain parts of itself.
Exactly. So that's the part that kind of confuses a lot of individuals, because, again, we're so linear. We say, no, no, why would soul do five different things at the same time, have five completely non binary experiences? We can't understand that it is completely non binary. There's no such thing as a one binary experience of soul energy, which is why we think about it as fractionated, as stuck, not being able to move on. It's my job as the medium to cross it over. No, it's not your job. You're not that important. We love to make ourselves feel that important, but we're not. It's already done its work. Your work is to be so clear that you only perceive the highest elevation of that information. I mean, I feel
Mhm.
like I'm slapping the wrist of the spiritual community, right?
Okay, so this sparks an idea in my head, which I know you have no problem triggering people because you do it all the time on Instagram.
Right?
And I don't know what your opinion is on this topic because I don't think I've ever seen you do a video on it. But on the topic of soul splitting, it brings up the twin flame topic.
Yeah.
So, what is your perception, idea of it? What do you see of it?
Yeah, so I'll speak from a personal experience, but then I'll speak through a developed experience. When I was in high school, I thought I was going through a twin flame experience, right? Because I felt like, well, this is an aspect reflection of my soul. And this is so important without realizing that I was going through a trauma bond, right? So what does that really say? It says that soul is non-autonomous, that we are coming from the same whole. We are just now fractionated into two different parts of the same whole. Now, again, we romanticize the soul in that way, meaning I have a soul mate, my other reflection of me, without realizing that the soul has many mates. You and your pet, you and your child, you and your partner, you and your mother, you and your grandmother, you and your friend. There are many combinations of a soul mating that is completely non-romantic. And if you can remove the language of romance or trauma bonding, soul is sovereign. And within that sovereignty, it experiences multiple things at the same time, which means there are aspects of soul conversations of you in soul world and me in soul world that said, hey, we're going to connect during COVID. Something's going to be magical and magnetic for us while simultaneously having other experiences. So to summarize it, I think that the idea of twin flames is a very lofty idea. I think that it has become hyperbolized to be a little bit cult-like, meaning that there is a very large idea that someone has, and then it becomes proselytized and it becomes followed, but it's not a healthy, helpful technique. It keeps you unsovereign. And in essence, it takes away all responsibility. And I want you to feel responsible.
I love your explanation of it. And like I said, you always say things in such a warmer, more eloquent way than what I would say them. But, you know, I feel like a lot of times, and I know this triggers people every time that I say it, but every time I hear someone talk about a twin flame journey, I just know 9 times out of 10, I'm about to hear the most fucked up story I've ever heard in my life, or they're about to have the worst next 2 years of their life that they've ever had. Like,
I agree.
I'm like, from just the data alone, this can't be what they're saying it is. But I am a believer, of course, the many different types of soulmates. Some are romantic, some are pet, some are friend.
Yep.
There's several romantic soulmates in a lifetime for some people. And it's like, yeah, I think like, you know, why isn't soulmate enough? You know, why does it have to be we're from the same soul and merging back to each other? And then our merging saves the whole world. Then you tie in the spiritual narcissism.
Absolutely. You know, one of the fascinating things that is the commonality with every individual that has pushed the twin flame language, meaning I've had twin flame experts get so angry at me, experts, right? To say, no, but here's what it actually means. The commonality on a frequency level is this: trauma in not being sovereign as a child, meaning not being given independence or feeling like your freedom was taken away from you. That's commonality number 1. Commonality number 2 is trauma. Trauma specifically in the need for approval, which translates as you become older as the need to fix and codependency. I do not feel like I am free enough. So therefore I get glamored by someone else who gives me a sense of freedom. So I am now dependent on that. And then the fixer conversation is, or it's my job to fix the problem in my mate, right? Those two are the main commonalities of everyone I've ever seen that pushes a twin flame narrative.
And it's so interesting because it's a topic that I kind of talk about a lot in a different form where, you know, you have the empath and energy vampire, or you have the people pleaser and the narcissist. And really, when you go back to the origin, they both have like two sides of the same wound, like not having their needs met. And then so one person has their needs met by bending over backwards and doing everything and overgiving. And then the other person, either the energy vampire or the narcissist, the way that they got their needs met is through manipulation and taking and putting themselves first. And these people will keep meeting up with each other again and again because they're at that same frequency of the same wound, seeing the other side. And I kind of, you know, obviously feminine and masculine means a lot beyond what it does, but it's like, it's almost like an active and a receiving version of that wound that will always, that's why people like, And, one of the things when I went through my really rough shadow work journey last year was,
Mm.
I had a series of like all of my partners had always cheated. And this thing of like people are like a mirror of you. And I'm like, but I would never do that. And no matter how much information I have, no matter
Yeah.
how much work I've done, healing and all of these things, I couldn't like understand why
Mhm.
this person would do this. And, it was also because this wound was even hidden from me in a coping
Mm.
mechanism. But it really kind of brought me back to kind of almost like a self-hatred wound.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's what's causing someone to be a cheater and
Yeah.
causing someone to always be with people that are going to cheat on them. Because it really just, I mean, like a self-worth wound, what it comes back to, but it's like a very dark self-worth wound. But, me being a Leo and me being all of these things,
That
that
was
was even hidden
Leo's.
from me. It was hidden from me even, protected myself from it. But, through my shadow work last year, which really,
Ooh.
came it was like it was almost like a demonic force, but
Oh, yeah.
really it was just like the shadow being casted from a deep childhood wound.
Yep.
And when I had a shamanic healing with my friend, at first she was kind of like, okay, we're going to remove it. And when she got in there, she was like, oh my God, it was you as a baby. I was
Oh,
so
yeah.
upset.
Yeah.
And so it really helped me to understand and, be able to put into words, which thank God then I can share with other people that like we really are mirroring something, but it's
Mhm.
hard to see if that person is hurting you, how that person is a mirror to you.
Yep.
And that mirroring sometimes we have to go back to the root versus the actions of the mirror.
Oh, yeah. You nailed it. Shadow work is not easy. In fact, it's not called shadow easy. It's called work because it's work. And thank you for being so open and candid about that. And again, I think it's important for people to realize that even though you might be a very skilled and nuanced academic, you still have your human experiences. Though I choose to see the world through frequency and light, I still have heartbreak. I still have massive things that can happen to my personal life that I have got to figure out how to process in shadow work. When it comes to, well, I can't say that all shadow work looks like this, but most shadow work, to go back to the theory of denting the biofield, it does look like that a little bit more amplified, where it looks like a carving out. So
Mhm.
if this is my normal field and I'm going through some kind of massive breakup or someone has been unfaithful to me, it doesn't dent it, it actually carves the space out. So now there is such a large space that used to be there that is no longer there. What ends up happening is we as humans think that I have to focus on growth after an unfaithful relationship. So we date differently, we do all the work, but what's happening is we're focusing on growth and not healing.
Mhm.
Healing is not the same thing as growth. Growth is sustainability, sovereignty, and more, but that's not healing. Healing hurts. And because healing is painful, we get glamored by growth instead. So now I focus on I'm growth. That experience happened 5 years ago. But what happens now is you still have this dent in your field, right? This carved out space in your field. And you said, well, that happened 3 years ago. It's not a big deal. Well, it's still a big deal because you've only had time pass. So now you are going to glamour by thinking that anyone else who fills that space is going to be my new mate, without realizing that you are going to glamour yourself to only subconsciously fall in love with individuals who fill that space, as opposed to saying, I have the fortitude and the strength to mend that space on my own. So I'm not reliant on someone else, which is why we have cycles.
Wow.
Sorry.
Okay, so with the frequency stuff, okay,
Mhm,
because I like how, you really bring it back to being able to see frequencies.
mhm.
And I know that this is what your course is about. So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about the course that you are offering now and also, some other things that you also, because if you help people, I know to be able to like develop their abilities similar to yours.
Right. So my goal is to teach people that everyone has access to intuitive frequencies. Everyone does. Today we focus a little bit on smell. Everyone has access. It does appear that people are natural with certain kinds of intuitions. You know, you have a natural singer versus someone who can't carry a tune. You can learn how to sing for joy. You just may not be as natural. Everyone shows potentiality, from people who are on the spectrum, people who are mentally delayed, people who are completely physically capable. Everyone has potential. Our goal is to teach you what is my natural alignment. What is more high for me? What is rising for me? What is growing for me? What might be delayed? So the course that we have, Intuition Unveiled, Uncharted Insights, takes you way beyond psychic five senses. When we start to learn in Mediumship 101 and Psychic Work 101, you learn about knowing and sight and smell and taste and hearing and gut reaction. When you look at every single one of those, gut reaction, sight, they have a frequency. Sight looks like something in the biofield. Cognition looks like something in the biofield. So when you utilize the ability to say, well, if those five intuitions look like something, are there any more? There's many, many more ways to look at frequency of intuition. So our course, Intuition Unveiled, Uncharted Insight, teaches you how to tune into 12.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know
12.
there was 12.
There's more than 12. There's many more than 12, but we teach 12 because 12 is a lot for the brain. And then from there, when we go into more advanced work, we go into 16. And then from there, we go into more advanced work. So that's our learning module that we currently have out. This year, we have another module coming out that says, now that I've learned claircognizance, for example, is there a healing practice that I can learn because I'm dominant cognizant? Yes. Is there a healing practice you can learn because you're dominant audient? Yes. So we partner healing practices, 12 different kinetic ways to use your frequency to offer assistance to other individuals. Everyone can do this. This is not specific to me being a seer. I know that everyone can do this. It just so happens that it happened quite young for me. So I, have a lot of years underneath my belt.
So I have a question about that, because something that I've noticed, a lot of times people, friends have come up to me with this kind of similar experience. And I'll tell you what my interpretation and advice that I've given them is, but like what you're offering is actually something that would be very helpful to them. So I've had a couple of people have something like, say, for example, a friend of mine was in a yoga class in Koreatown. And so she started getting this. I mean, at first she was wondering if she was having like some type of seizure or some type of brain issue, but it was so prominent that it was coming in, and it felt like it was her father, but it wasn't her father. It was a Korean man. And he was like frantically trying to tell her something.
Yep.
And she was like, what is going on? And then she would be, in a store and like be in a dance studio. And it was like so bad that she felt like she was going to faint. And then she was like, do I need to get my brain checked? Everything's fine. And when she was telling me about it, it seems like it's kind of almost like an accidental mediumship coming through, or picking up on things, either echo energy in the space or picking up from messages from the other side. So I think, like, how about like people's abilities come on in this kind of aggressive, like intrusive way like that? What advice do you have for those people? And then also, in your class, maybe what type of ability do they have?
Yeah. So let's address that. In fact, I want you to make sure that your friend listens to this. When someone feels like an ability comes online quickly and aggressively, I guarantee you are either in the alpha, theta, or gamma brainwave. Always. Why? When you're out of beta, which is my stress and my anxiety and my needing to accomplish, when you go into a flow state, what happens? The brain becomes more neutral. If she's in a yoga class, more than likely she was in a gamma brainwave state, where she's like concentrating and it's coming in with ease and it's relaxed all at the same time, highly amplified. So when you take a look at those brainwaves connect to the neutral space of energy, which means she was more primed and ready in that space. Also because her body was at a place of being vulnerable. I'm expanded. It's a warm room. My body feels loose. So not only does the mind feel unease of a conduit, but so did the body. So it sounds like two things happened. A perception of spiritual consciousness, my body not learning how to be in alkalinity of holding on to spiritual energy, which means the body is going to feel what? Discombobulated. So it sounds like she did two things. She did a different brainwave than she normally does, and the body had opened. Now,
Mhm.
my suggestion to her when she listens to this is to say, if you went into that so easily without realizing it, without even doing it on command, can you imagine what happens if you do it on command?
Mm.
If you make choice to engage when you desire. That's what my goal would be for her. So it sounds like her innate frequency would have been naturally to tune into a physical vibration of spirit, which actually has nothing to do with those five senses. That's actually outside of the five senses, right?
Oh, wow.
And a little bit of clairvoyancy, since she was seeing the visualizations of things. It sounds like she's doing it in tandem ability. How
Wow.
exciting for them! How exciting for
Incredible.
them!
And one of the other times that it happened to her was when she was busy at work, and it was like you get into autopilot at work. So that's also,
Yep, alpha.
even though you're still doing stuff, when you're completely in autopilot at work and just like in flow state, another time when it had popped in for her. Wow.
So tell her that information. But now let's go back to what we said earlier about something. When you have a reader who says demon, evil, parasites, what brainwave are they in? Beta.
Mm.
They are
Wow.
in the over analytical, stimulated fear, synaptic wiring of my sympathetic nervous system. They are in beta, which means they're going to see through anxiety and fear.
Mhm. Wow. Kimo, you're incredible. You're incredible. I love you. This was a wonderful, wonderful podcast. I can't wait to have you on again and go like so much deeper into
Please.
all of these things. And yeah, I'm without words. I have so much more to ask you in the future.
Without words, my friend who was so loquient, I've stripped you of your voice. How exciting!
Yeah, what psychic ability is that? No.
That is a psychic ability.
Oh, really?
It is.
Wow.
And we can talk about that personally or maybe on another podcast, but it's this one. It's all throat ability, which is actually
Ooh.
a visual vibration that can actually be expanded. Oh my gosh. We need like
Mm. Okay, so anyone listening that knows they have psychic abilities, that wants to develop them, I mean, you
come
already know where to
visit.
go now. You already know where to go. There's so much more than the 5 that everybody's talking about, and then really being able to, like, tap into, being able to use these and work your way up and maybe even be able to do healings and stuff with them.
Absolutely. 100%.
I'm so excited for the work that you're doing, and so excited we got to do this.
So thank you for having me here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for listening to Ultra Minds with JK Ultra, where every Thursday we come out with a new interview interviewing some of the greatest minds in spirituality, consciousness, aliens, conspiracies, astrology, and so much more. And make sure you check out my Tuesday Night Live every Tuesday night, where I do a live stream and we do a Q&A and we go a deep dive into topics like the simulation theory, shadow work, spiritual bypassing, spiritual gurus turned cult leaders, aliens, my own experiences, and so much more. So make sure you subscribe, put on notifications, and if you would like to support my work, you can also become a subscriber to my Substack, which is $11 a month at jennifercarmody.substack.com. And once a month for our paid subscribers, we do a live event where we do a group hypnosis, a group meditation, or a group manifestation exercise. And thank you so much. Make sure that you subscribe, comment, do all the things, all the YouTube stuff.